right, so when I go to find the equation for this graph, I have to think of two things. It's either going to be, because this section is on the graph of sine or cosine, it's either going to be capital A sine of bx, or it's going to be capital A cosine of bx. And the way that I decide is I have to remember the parent functions. So sine of x starts at the origin. In other words, it crosses through the origin and does this. That's sine. Cosine starts at 1 and goes down to -1 and does this sort of thing. That's cosine. So when I look at this function, it goes through the origin, doesn't it? So I'm going to have to use sine. So I'm going to say y is equal to a sine of bx. Okay? All right. Well, a is the amplitude. So that means I got to look at the maximum value and the minimum value. So it goes from 1 to -1. But it's flipped. So remember that your amplitude A is equal to, well, let me back up, I wrote that wrong. Your amplitude is equal to the absolute value of A. Well, it goes from 1, in other words, the amplitude is 1. Okay? So this has to equal 1. But because the sine, notice that sine goes up. It goes from the origin and goes up, but here it goes down. So it's flipped. So that means that my amplitude, which is actually 1, is from the absolute value of -1. So I've got -1 sine of bx. Now to find the b, I know that there's a relationship. Let me write this over here. I'll have a little more room. Remember that the period, well, I'll just do it here. The period is equal to 2 pi over b. So I just need to find the period, and when I find the period, then I'll have my answer. So I go from peak to peak, or I go from, if it's sine, I go from here to here. So this is pi over 12. This is pi over 4. So I got to think, what gives me pi over 12? Like, that's weird. Like, what are we counting by? So this is 1 pi over 12. That means this would be 2 pi over 12. That makes this 3 pi over 12, which reduces down to 1/4, right? So what would this be? 4 pi over 12. And what does that reduce down to? Pi over 3. So my period then is pi over 3 is equal to 2 pi over b. I've got to get the b out of the bottom, so I'm going to multiply this by b. And remember, I got to do the same thing over here. So in my next line, I'm going to have pi over 3 times b is equal to, the b's will cancel, 2 pi. To get b by itself, I'm going to divide by pi over 3 on both sides. So then b is equal to 2 pi divided by the fraction pi over 3. When you divide by a fraction, you actually multiply by the reciprocal. Pi divided by pi is 1. So this becomes 1, this becomes 1. So we got 2 times 1 times 3, which is 6, over 1. So my b value is 6. Okay? So now in my next line, I'm going to say y equals, and I don't need to put the 1. I could just say negative sine 6x. Now how could I verify that? Easy. I just graph it in Desmos. So you guys will have different numbers, so you're going to crank through the math, and the way that you can identify or verify that is just graphing it. So if I say sine of x, right? Oh, it's actually sine of 6x. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Wow, let me back up. That's way too many graphs. Let me just take a screenshot. What does that go to? One full period, which is pi over 3. So we're just going to do 1 period to the left, 1 period to the right. So I'm going to zoom in to 1 period. So we're just going to go rip. No, I don't want that for the y-axis. There you go.